Hello and welcome to Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today, I'm actually a co-host with my good friend and author, Lyndi Allison. Good morning, Lyndi, and welcome to Fresh Waves.
Good morning, Brenda. It's a pleasure to join you here this morning.
Well, I was just listening to one of our former podcasts and broadcasts that we've done here on Whistle FM, and I was inspired to call you and have another talk, only this time instead of just talking about writing, and I don't mean just because writing is such a vast topic. I'd like to talk about one of our mutual favorite pastimes, which is hiking or walking in nature.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I've enjoyed for a while, and because of my connection to you, it's something I appreciate even more now because of what you've taught me about it.
Oh, well, that's great. I have a little business called Twigs and Tea, and I do guided forest therapy. I come at it from an expressive arts background, which makes it a little different from other types of forest therapy because there are many types of forest therapy. And of course, I'm not a therapist. The forest is the therapy. But, you know, it's one thing to tell people, yeah, go out for a walk in the forest. And they stand there and they say, ooh, isn't this nice? Yeah, there's big trees. It's a really nice place. And other people stand there and say, this is really scary and I want to get out of here as soon as I can. But it's like trying to learn yoga online. If you go to a yoga class and someone shows you how to put your foot or how to put your arm, how to distribute your weight, it's completely different than trying to follow along when you're on a Zoom or YouTube or whatever mode you're trying to learn yoga from. And that's not to say that you can't use YouTube or whatever other platform you have in mind once you know what you're doing. But I think you get a lot more out of it if you're with other people and you're learning together, and once you have the moves down and you have your practice in place, then you can go online and just have someone kind of remind you of what you're doing out there. Does that seem to make sense?
It does. And it's not just the physical aspect of, how you're planting your body, say with your feet at, 10 and 2 when you're coming downhill so that you keep your balance. As important as that kind of balance is, it also helps you with other forms of balance, balancing later in your life, other aspects of your life. And I think that comes from something you've shared with me about the importance of your approach when you're going into the forest. You have this very open spirit. You expressed that really well in that poem you wrote for the Natural Connections writing journal, where you talk about how you wander in wonder and how all aspects of our senses and the whole experience open up because of how you set yourself up for it.
Oh, thanks. That was a poem that I wrote just out of the sheer love of being in the forest. And I enjoy so much the processing of what I've experienced in the forest. And that's where writing and physical movement after the effect comes into play with me. It's a way of processing an experience. And of course, that's what a lot of writing is. When we do the AWA method of writing and other methods of writing, and we are processing what we're thinking, it kind of gets us out of the hamster wheel that runs around in our brains. That image of a hamster on the wheel just going around and around and around and around as fast as they can. And many of us suffer from that. What do they call it? The monkey brain or whatever, that just doesn't stop. And that's why forest therapy or forest connections, going out into the forest, going out into nature, can also help us with sleep. And if you can take yourself back to where you were in the forest or where you were on the beach with the ocean and the waves, you can often get yourself to sleep because it affects the parasympathetic nervous system, it affects blood pressure, it affects your heart rate. And while you're there, all these things are beneficial. They're benefits from walking in the forest. but it's also nature connections. Now, they've done a ton of studies, and I've shared this with you before. They've done a ton of studies where people who are convalescing are looking out a window at a brick wall. There's another group who looks out a window onto a park setting, and there's another group who looks out the window onto a forest or a really natural space. And the ones that heal the fastest are the ones who are looking onto the forest and the natural space. Second place is the park-like setting with mowed lawns and planted gardens. And of course, the ones that seem to recover at a slower rate and experience more pain are the ones who are looking at a concrete wall. And that's, those studies have come out of Japan, they've come out of England, they've come out of the UK, and they've come out of Germany as well. There's been a lot of studies done, and more studies are being done because these studies are presenting results that really can't be ignored. The benefits of being in nature are astounding.
Yes, in the book that you referred to me by Dr. King Lee called Forest Bathing, How Trees Can Help You Find Health and Happiness, right in his introduction, he sets it out. He says, we all know how good being in nature can make us feel. We've known it for millennia. The sounds of the forest, the scent of the trees, the sunlight playing through the leaves, the fresh, clean air. These things give us a sense of comfort. They ease our stress and worry, help us to relax, and to think more clearly. Being in nature can restore our mood, give us back our energy and vitality, refresh and rejuvenate us. That makes me want to go for a hike.
And if someone's listening and they say, I'm not up for hiking, it can be a walk. The difference between a hike and a walk is, I think, just the length of time that you're doing it. Hikers tend to be pretty serious, and they go off for these 2, 3, 4 hour walks wherever they're going, and some of them go up mountains and stuff. I'm afraid of heights, so that's never a hike that I'm really happy with. But a walk in the forest is just as good. You do not have to be a super athlete in order to benefit from a walk in the forest.
Yeah, there are definitely different purposes. So, sometimes we have challenges. We can challenge our body and push our body maybe to get to a lovely natural space that we want to see, or to see a particular vista or view. But sometimes, we need to just kind of slow it down. It doesn't have to be something where it's such a striving. It's more of being aware of what's around. And, that slower pace can open us up to seeing things that we wouldn't see if we were just, on that fast trudging trek where we're, just moving the body, which also has its benefits.
Yes, of course. And that's part of going into the forest, I think, is to set your intentions before you go. There are people who are looking to raise their heart rates, do a cardio workout, and get in and out of the forest as fast as possible, raise that heart rate, keep it raised, then cooler down and get on with your day. That has its benefits. But if you're doing forest therapy, then you're doing a much slower paced walk. And I like to say a more brain exercise walk where you're exercising your senses. You're looking at where you are smelling where you are aware of your surroundings. And it's a gentle awareness at first, maybe a hyper awareness afterwards, where you are listening, smelling, seeing, tasting, feeling, all of these things. And you're doing it in a safe way. And that's why I think a lot of guides provide a real service for people. Because when you talk about touching and feeling the forest around you, I caution people to be a little careful. If you don't know where you are and what you're doing, be aware. And a lot of people learn about forest therapy when they're in Canada, say. And we have, other than poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, those kinds of things. There's not so much that you can touch in the forest that would really hurt you. But if you're in South America or Central America, where you are, Lyndi, in Panama, you may not want to be touching the bark of trees. There are some trees there that have poisonous barks that will give you quite a rash, some that can actually kill you. There are branches that look like a branch, and if you grab on to touch that branch, it's actually a snake, and not the friendliest of snakes, and snakes by and large don't like you touching them. So there are safe ways of being in a forest or a natural space, and I think it's really important to know the safety, know where you are, and I can't stress how important that is. Many of these websites, if you go to Google forest therapy or forest bathing, they will tell you, to go out in the forest and lean against a tree. And I would say they also say that this is not a nature walk. This is not a walk where you're going to learn to be an environmentalist. You don't have a naturalist with you talking about the different species of trees and wildlife and plants that you will see. Yet I think it's really important that all forest therapy guides know something about those things in order to be able to keep their participants safe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time I've almost grabbed for a tree trunk and found it, was just loaded with thorns or fire ants, and they can be kind of nasty. Mm-hmm. But I do recall when you were here in Panama, you and I took a hike out to Manglarito Falls, which is a trek through the forest to, a very popular waterfall here. And you shared with me the experience of forest bathing. So you and I have been talking a little bit about it, but can you just maybe take us through and show us what does it look like to go for a guided forest walk?
Well, that's a good question. And there are many different ways of doing it. Like I said earlier, I come from an expressive arts background. So I think it's all about focusing and being mindful. So I start out a forest walk, usually especially if I'm at the end of a road or the beginning of a path, and I'll say, if you would like to leave your worries behind, you can choose a stone and pick up that stone and give it all of your worries. Then gently place the stone on the side of the path, and for the time that you're going to be walking in the forest, you have left your worries behind. And the reason I do that is because some people really need that physical manifestation of leaving your worries behind. Just to say it isn't enough for them. They just put it in their pocket and walk with it anyway. So the physical manifestation of looking at the stone. Stones are hard. Stones are rocks. Stones can take a lot of abuse. So you can comfortably leave your worries with the stone. One of the safety features that I always say is, please bring your cell phone. I know that lots of people would say, oh, why would you bring your cell phone? Why would you bring the technology into the forest? I would say put it on airplane mode. First of all, a cell phone's very good if you're in a situation where you're in an emergency for some reason and you need to contact somebody. So many of our forests are now connected to the internet, so you have cell service. And also, I like to take pictures, and I think pictures are a lovely way of being able to process what you've seen in the forest. And also sometimes they lead us to see things that we hadn't seen before, because you're seeing it through the eye of a lens, especially phones like an iPhone that are actually showing you what the phone wants you to see versus what you're actually seeing, which can be frustrating, but it also can be pretty magical depending on how you see it. And then we go for a little walk and we get immersed into the forest. And I have several forest tracts, both in the York Regional Forest and up in Halliburton, that I particularly like because they have a lot of different features. Like one has a water feature, one has a beautiful creek, one has a view of a lake, one has just a little stream that is more active in the spring and less active in the fall. And I like the diversity in the forests that I choose, and it gives us a lot to see. So I will ask people, we'll stop after about 10 minutes and we look. And we look broad and wide. We look far, far away, and we look very close up. We see what's around us, and we gently focus on where we are within the things that we see. So where am I in relationship to the trees? How tall am I in relationship to the trees? Where am I on the path? Is there a path? What do we see when we look around? And when we do that, then we come together after a few minutes and we share what we've seen. And it's very interesting. I've had a group of 8 or 9 people out, and everybody sees something different. And everyone sees the world around them differently. And when we share what we have seen, it's interesting because you and I've even spoken about this, Lyndi, how you never noticed that. And I never noticed what you were looking at. And now that we do, we're enriched by each other's experience. And I think that's wonderful, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm hearing what you're saying about the picture taking, too. My friend and I walked the beach one time, and she took a photograph. And when we got home, she sent it to me, thinking she had just taken a picture of a piece of driftwood. And underneath, there was a turtle laying eggs. And because of how it blended in, we hadn't even seen it. And so, yeah,
Wow.
the pictures can capture things as well. And I also liked, like, when we had that experience of forest bathing and we were looking around, I believe it gave the prompt of not just looking at, you know, what you see when you're looking up at the trees in terms of the branches and leaves, but also the spaces in between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I find that fascinating. Humans are attracted to fractals and geometric shapes. And when we look in the forest, there are so many geometric patterns and mandalas. There are a lot of mandalas in nature, natural mandalas like a spider's web. That would be one of the most relatable ones. But you can also see mandalas in the spaces between the leaves on a tree.
And also the Fibonacci spirals and everything.
Mm-hmm.
All of the, you know, flower blossoms or in a pineapple, you know, this, you know, it's something that just is very prevalent in nature. And when you pause to look at these things and all of a sudden they are making an appearance before you, it just feels quite significant.
Mm-hmm. Well, then we continue our walk. And we listen to the sounds around us. And we listen to the wind in the trees, the sounds of the birds, the sound of silence. We always think of the forest as being so silent. But is it really? Can we hear things that we never paid attention to before? And it's not that they weren't there, it's just that we weren't listening. And then how do we relate ourselves to our surroundings and the way we listen? One of the funniest things I think about when I think about forest therapy is I've been on a number of hikes with other forest therapists who have the best of intentions, I must say. And they go very quietly and stealthily into the forest. Well, there is something to be said for the fact that in a forest situation, when you are at the top of the food chain and you are being sneaky in the forest, quiet and walking very stealthily through the forest, you're perceived as being on the hunt. You are perceived as being dangerous. If you go into the forest and you're talking and stomping your feet and chatting around, you are perceived as being no threat whatsoever to the forest. Anything making that much noise and being that careless has got to be non-threatening. It's when you're super quiet and super cautious that the forest around you will all of a sudden become very still. And everything is standing still and keeping watch and being vigilant. And you can feel the energy of the forest change. It's been known in Panama and South America, Central America, places where there's snakes, for millennia. In order to scare the snakes, people pound with sticks on the ground, and it's a thump, 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 thump. And this thumping noise makes the snakes scatter. It doesn't hurt them in any way. It just lets them know that you're there, and they leave. MNR, the Ministry of Natural Resources, when you talk to the people about bears, they will tell you that if you've been hiking in Ontario in any wilderness areas, chances are you've been within 2 feet of a bear many times in your experiences in the forest. But if the bear knows that you are there, especially in Ontario, where we only have black bears by and large in South and Central Ontario, and we're not dealing with grizzlies out west. That's not what I'm talking about. But by and large, if the bear knows where you are, the bear will go and hide. And they don't need to be 2 miles away from you. They can be 10 feet away from you, hiding in the forest, and you walk by. This happened to me last week, walking down a dirt road at the cottage that's not used very much, and I came around a corner, and there, maybe 5 or 6 meters ahead of me, was a black bear. He looked at me, I looked at him, he turned around and he ran into the forest. Now, I had my dog with me, and as soon as we got to where I'd seen him disappear into the trees, my dog's hair all stood up on the back of his neck. He tried to get as far away from that scent as he could. So that bear wasn't gone. He was just sitting in the forest watching me and my dog, and as soon as I'd passed, I'm sure he went about his business. So when we go into the forest, and we need to be mindful of how we enter the forest. And then take a listen, take a look. I was once with a naturalist in the forest, and I asked her, I said, what kind of bird is making that noise? And she said, it's a chickadee. And I said, no, a chickadee is that chickadee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee. And she said, no, that's the warning call of the chickadee, letting all the other birds know that you are here.
Hey, bird sounds are wonderful in the forest.
Aren't they?
Pluck of the can.
And if you are really in tune with what is going on with the bird call, you can kind of place yourself within what's going on in the forest. Are you perceived as a threat? Are you perceived as not a threat? Are you a frightening entity? Or can you allow your presence to be known and then blend a little bit with the forest, so that you become a part of it and they go about their business not feeling threatened by you at all? It's kind of magic when you think about it. So we're going to see, we're going to hear, and then we're going to feel. And you think to yourself, how am I going to feel the forest? Well, you feel the forest in different ways, like the air around you. You can feel the air. You can feel whether it's hot or cold, whether there's a warm breeze or a cool breeze, whether there's a wind, whether you can feel dampness, humidity, or a cool, crisp winter day, how you feel that, how you perceive that. Can you take your mittens off and hold your hands up and feel the cold on your warm hands? There's all kinds of ways that we can feel the air and the atmosphere of the forest. And then we can do things like touch. You can touch a tree. You can, if it's safe to do so, you can touch the snow. You can touch a rock. There's a big movement of natural forest and nature exercising in Quebec, and you get a special designation as a fitness coach to do natural fitness in natural spaces, and they often use a rock face or an outcropping of rock to do push-ups on, or to do standing push-ups and things like that, where your hands are flat on the rocks. And there's something to be said for putting your hands on ancient things and feeling the energy of ancient things, and rocks are certainly ancient things. So we can feel stones, we can feel how hard they are, how smooth they are, how jagged they are. All these different things come into play in the feeling, in using our senses. And I think we're going to take a little break now at the station, and when we come back, we'll continue our talk, because there's 5 senses and we're at 3. So we have tons more to talk about. Thanks for joining us this morning, Lyndi, all the way from Panama. And this is Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. We're speaking about forest therapy, forest bathing, and hiking. and walking and just being a part of nature this morning. Do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come. Hi, this is Bren of Fresh Waves. If you'd like to hear this podcast again or other podcasts on Fresh Waves, just go to our YouTube channel, Fresh Waves Radio, and hit subscribe. We love to have subscribers. We're going to continue our conversation with Lyndi Allison this morning about hiking and forest therapy. So let's get back to the show.
You know, Brenda, you were mentioning about sound, and what I remember about the forest bathe that we did together by Manglarito Falls, I feel particularly affected by sound. So, you know, I really like the listening aspect of the forest bathing. But when you're by a waterfall like Manglarito, just the sheer power of the water coming over the rocks, it's such a forceful and strong sound. And I recall, you know, how you showed me, you know, how to shift our focus, you know, how to not be listening to that forceful sound and listening to the trickling of the brook that was nearby our feet. And, you know, such a different sound, right? Such a babbling, joyful, delightful sound. And in focusing on that sound, that became the thing that was the loudest. And so I really like this idea where you're guiding people to focus on something in particular. And for me, that was a life lesson, right? Sometimes, you know, life can be harsh or rushing and forceful, and you know, we can hardly hear or think straight. But, you know, when we shift our focus, you know, to that joyful sound, you know, we get that refreshing and restoration. And for me, that was just like a little tiny glimpse into the refreshment that forest bathing can bring.
And with that refreshment also brings that calming effect. And it lowers your blood pressure. The phytoncides that are in the air that we're just talking about, seeing, hearing, feeling, and smelling. And if you take the time to breathe deeply, first of all, there's the negative ions around the water where the big waterfalls was, but also where that little tiny trickle was that we were listening to. And I have to say, one of the best things about that waterfall that you showed me was the fact that it actually tumbled into a rock canyon where the rock was kind of around us on three sides. And the echo that was in that chamber, not only from the water, but from our voices, from birds that flew in. There were butterflies everywhere, those blue ones. They were just fantastic. Oh, there was so much to see and feel and breathe. Oh, it was just wonderful. Now, trees have essential oils, basically. They're called phytoncides. And phytoncides are given off by the trees to help protect them against viruses, blights, insects that are destructive and things like that. And we breathe in those phytoncides when we're in the forest, and we benefit from them as well. The forest can help strengthen our immune system through the phytoncides. There's all kinds of research that talks about how different elements that we're breathing in the air in the forest, not to mention the fact that it's so oxygen rich from the trees and filtered oxygen rich. Trees give off oxygen, but they also filter toxins from the air. So we're breathing in really good air when we're in the forest. And it's so essential for us to understand that and be mindful of it. The smells of the forest are not just pleasant, but they're telling. And it's wonderful to stop and notice all of these different things. So the phytoncides are helping us. It's lowering our blood pressure. It's boosting our immune systems by the phytoncides and other things like the negative ions from the water and such. And if you don't know what a negative ion is, it's if you've ever been outside in the woods or a park or something after the rain, and you smell that beautiful fresh smell that happens after a really good rain, those are the negative ions in the air. So It's always nice to go walking where there's a water feature, specifically a natural water feature. And we've talked about the feeling and the smelling. Smelling kind of leads us into breathing. Breathing when you're out in nature is really important. The huff, huff, huff of, I'm walking, I gotta get to where I'm going. Or I'm running through the forest and I'm the cardio run and everything, and you tend to not pay attention to your breath. Well, one of the best things to do is to slow down and actually breathe. So breathe in through your nose and out through your nose. Try not to sigh. Try not to do that. Because it's not using your breath in the most productive way. Your nose is full of little cilia, little hairs that filter out any toxins. Breathe deeply through your nose and out through your nose. And then open your mouth and taste the air of the forest. And the best way to describe this kind of activity is to think about wine tasting. When you go wine tasting, they ask you to hold the wine in your mouth, swish it around, and then open your mouth, but not breathe through your mouth, and just kind of let the air go into the wine, and that gets the wine taste up into your upper palate, and you get a full experience of the wine. And you do the same thing with air. And as a matter of fact, if you open your mouth, but you're breathing through your nose, and you actually wave your hands gently in front of your face, almost coaxing the air into your mouth. First of all, you'll feel how you can change the air current around you by moving your hands. And this is the same thing like when you're trying to keep yourself cool by flapping your hand in front of your face. And then the air goes in your mouth and you can get a much better sense, complete sense of how the forest tastes. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's really interesting. And again, if you do not know what you are doing, please do not eat mushrooms and go foraging while you're on a forest therapy hike. Yes, you're immersing yourself in the forest, but do it in a safe way. Mushrooms can be very dangerous. Plants to eat can be very dangerous. I know what a wintergreen is, and I can pick the leaf, and I can eat it myself. But I wouldn't encourage you to look at a book of plant life and say, oh, I think this is wintergreen. I'm going to have a little chow. I would rather you go with an expert on foraging and learn about those kinds of things before you try tasting things from the forest. Now, most berries, like a raspberry, are good. And I would say eat some. Leave some for the birds, leave some for the bears, but have a taste and see what a wild raspberry tastes like. They're absolutely delicious. Or a wild strawberry. But if you don't know what that berry is, do not eat it, because it may not be safe. So taste is very precarious. If you know what you're doing, go ahead and taste. I did a forest walk with a man who chewed spruce sap as a gum, and he was chewing on it for the entire walk, annoying as it was. But he was fine with it. Would I go up to a spruce tree, gather up some sap and start eating it? Probably not. And nor would I ever recommend that you did that as well, unless you were in a foraging class and learning how to do that kind of thing. And it can be a delightful thing to be able to taste some of the treats from the forest. Right now up in Halliburton, specifically on one of my hikes, I've got a patch of wild blackberries, and they are just coming into season. So if you like them sour, now is the perfect time. If we get some sunshine this week, we will have a burst of blackberries, and I will caution you, in terms of touching, their branches are very thorny, and those thorns are unforgiving. They're just, be prepared to be stuck in your hand or your leg trying to get to the nicest blackberry. Doesn't seem to bother the bears, though, and they love the blackberries, so, there is that. And the birds, they just come in and eat all the blackberries. And I'm always very mindful. It's that symbiosis. How do we connect with nature like we used to in days gone by? How do we become part of it instead of interloping, instead of exploiting? And I think one of the ways we do that is to understand that if we're eating the blackberries and we've taken our little berry pot with us and we pick the entire patch clean, you have now taken the food of birds and bears and other creatures that eat those berries, of the procreation process where the berries drop to the ground all dried out and they turn into blackberries for coming generations. So take only what you need. In my experience, I just take a few just to get the flavor and the taste. I'm not there to make a pie, if you know what I mean. Anyway, you've been hiking for a very long time. Is this something that you used to do when you were in your working years, or something that you've taken up as a retirement kind of a hobby?
Well, I would say prior to moving to Panama, I was more of a walker, often through forests, say like the Ganaraska forests or down at, Darlington Park. And I used to really enjoy those kinds of walks year round. Of course, you have the 4 seasons there. So that's something that's been a very big change in coming here. I really needed, to get some rest and restoration and, get my body healthier when I moved here. And so I joined a hiking club and I started with some easier hikes to, some nice places, and then progressively moved up to more challenging hikes. And it has made a world of difference. When I go into the forest and I'm breathing in, I'm just picturing my body taking in the fight insides and picturing them strengthening my killer cells and allowing those killer cells, that are going to attack any viruses, and some say even cancer. And, it's opened up a great physical rejuvenation, but also a mental, also a spiritual one for me. I found some places that are very sacred and have held some wonderful space for me, just the majesty of the mountains, the wonder, as you talk about, wandering into wonder, the wondering about, the vastness of some of these mountain ranges. And, I've lost weight. I feel healthier all the way around. And now it's become so much a part of who I am and what I'm doing. It's become way more often. I can sense it in my body. I'm writing, but I'm writing some very deep and sometimes dark things. And it's not long before I'm going, take me back to those beautiful, breezes and, that feel on my skin. Here sometimes, the dampness on your skin is like that heavy, humid, wet blanket dampness. Sometimes it's the cool dampness of the cloud forest, depending on where you go. And there's so many wonderful places to explore, and each of them has this different experience of the forest. And it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful that you've shared this with me. I almost always come from the forest feeling an infilling of gratitude. It raised my gratitude quotient many, many, many times over. And of course that spills over into all aspects of our lives.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the best things about being out in the forest is that mental health component, where the fight insides, the air, the stress release all contribute to a really good place for mental health and repair of our minds as well as our bodies. And I think I have a friend who suffers from chronic depression, and every time she gets into the state where she can't get out of bed for days and days and days, her husband will scoop her up and put her in a blanket and stick her in the car and take her to the national park near their house. And an hour and a half into the walk that he has to coax her into going on, she feels the depression start to lift. And by the 2-hour mark, she's feeling 50% better. By the end of the hike, she can shake that dark cloud that's been hanging over her and keeping her in bed for days and days and days on end. And for her, it works like magic. And even though she knows it works, she still has to be coaxed into it. And she said, force fed the forest. He takes her there against her will, but she loves it. And it really lifts that depressive state that she finds herself in many times during her life. And studies have shown that it has, being in the forest and being in nature has a profound effect on your mental health. And I am talking about the forest and guided forest therapy, but there are also natural spaces like the one you took me to on the beach, where we went for a 14-kilometer walk on the beach, which is not a walk, it's more of a hike. And though we got to a spot or a part of the beach where there were no condos, there were no houses, it was just natural, untouched beach, with the mountains coming right down to the water. There was a river. There were beautiful stones and shells and sea glass. And it was just magic to be in this natural space. Think of the fact that there's so many machines now or apps for your phone that have the white noise at night. And one of those noises on every single machine, they all have the ocean sound of waves crashing against the shore. And the morning that you and I went, Lyndi, remember the tide was so far out? It wasn't a big crashing sound of waves. It was a light sound of waves. And it was fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's quite different than the Atlantic side, the Atlantic Ocean, here on the Pacific side. The tides, they rise sometimes 18 feet. And then, of course, when they're low, the water is quite a distance out. And you can walk on this sand that just has like a very thin layer of water that's just glistening, and hear those sounds. And the sounds change with every turn on the beach. Every different bay has a different sound depending on what rocks that are there. You know, paying attention to those sounds. And for me, I also, I imagine certain things, particularly if I have concerns. As the waves come in, I just imagine the waves taking out with them any of my concerns. And then as the waves come in, waves bringing in refreshment and, good things for my next steps. Mm-hmm. It really does. It changes your mindset. And in Japan, with forest bathing, for those who work too much or who, are experiencing burnout, those are things that are really challenging to overcome. They actually prescribe these things that we're talking about today.
Oh, yes, they do. Yep. And you can get a prescription for going out into the forest for 120 minutes a week. And the places of work have to honor the prescriptive medicine, because there is a new wave of what they're calling forest medicine. And one of the things that we should definitely talk about before we end this podcast, and we will do another one, so don't worry if you didn't think we went deep enough into some of these aspects, you can drop us a line at bren@freshwaves.ca with any of your questions, and we'll try and answer them in our next show. But one of the things we need to touch on is the fact that forest bathing, being in the forest or in nature, stimulates and increases our NK cells. And these are natural killer cells. And they attack things like viruses and cancers in our body. And we know that there's a whole bunch of medical science now that actually says that the NK cells are more active, that we as human beings are more relaxed and healthier and happier with reduced stress, reduced risk of non-communicable diseases and cancers just by being in the forest. And this new medical science is forest medicine. And forest medicine studies basically the effects of the forest environment on the health of human beings. And it's not anymore just it feels good, let's do it. There's actual scientific evidence backing up the fact that forest medicine is actually a thing. It's actually real, and it actually does help. There are 3 sections of the York Regional Forest that are accessible trails, and these accessible trails have things like pea gravel on the forest floor so that you can actually take a wheelchair or a gurney. There have been patients that have been wheeled in on a gurney into the York Regional Forest, and they've been able to benefit from being in the forest for as long as they can be there. Wheelchairs, baby strollers, they're all able to maneuver the pathways in these accessible areas, which makes the forest then accessible to people with disabilities or people who have mobility challenges. There's benches, very few inclines on these trails, and it's wonderful to see the effects that the forest can have. I think we all actually need to be in the forest. And immersion in the forest is great for promoting mental and physical health, and it's also just a nice place to be.
Sure is. Sure is. I know that very spot that I took you to, Manglarito Falls. I had the opportunity to bring a young man who was going through to be a doctor to that place. And I said to them, please, 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 have more experiences yourself out here in nature, because being a doctor is stressful and requires lots of hours. And then I said, and please, 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 please prescribe this for those who are suffering from some of those depressions that you're talking about. Imagine being handed a prescription to go to the forest once a week instead of, to pop some medication. What an enormous difference it would make in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can do a data dump if people need the validation to understand what's going on. But the NK cells that we were talking about, when they've done studies in Japan with people who have gone into the forest, and walked around for a couple of kilometers, and then they take their blood, they have found that by being in the forest, they have increased the NK cell activity by 50% by being out in the forest versus people who go for a walk in the city or in, cityscapes, where you're still relaxed because maybe you're on vacation or taking a break from your work. But the increase in the NK activity is profoundly more when you're in the forest and the forest areas. Not only that, Lyndi, here's an interesting fact for you. They have found that doing the blood tests and everything and all the testing on people's blood pressure and so on, that the effects seem to last for 7 days for everyone, and in most cases up to 30 days. So you've gone on a 2.5K walk, and 30 days later, you're still feeling the good effects of going for that walk. Isn't that incredible?
It's absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
And from an expressive arts point of view, when I think of going for that walk and taking some pictures, and no, don't just have your face behind your phone the whole time taking pictures. Take pictures of things that are special and are going to jog your memory when you get back. But I do believe that taking the time to process what you have seen and done and learned and felt and smelled and all the rest of it through writing or movement. I often stand outside when it's a bit breezy and I put my arms out like a tree and my fingers out like little branches and twigs, and I move the way the trees are moving. It is so relaxing. You can feel your whole body change as you're moving with the breeze instead of moving against it like we do so often because we're in a hurry to get here and a hurry to get there and the weather just gets in our way. But to be a part of the weather, to stand in the rain when it's not thundering and lightning, and to feel it hit your body and not just be wet, but be nourished by the rain that's falling from the sky, the way the trees and the plants are. To see a tree whose leaves will turn upside down so that it can get the most benefit from the rain. To watch how the rain drips off of the branches of a tree to what they call a drip line, which is not right against the trunk of a tree, but out further where the roots are spreading. And you get to feel the presence of the tree underground by noticing where the rain is falling around that tree, to feel and see where the wind is blowing during a rainstorm and how part of the tree is dry and the other side is wet because that's the way the wind is blowing the rain onto that tree. All of these things contribute to a really mindful experience in the forest, and with all the other benefits that you're not even consciously aware of, like the phytoncides and the NK cells in your body that are running around doing what they're supposed to do and doing it in a really good way. It's an amazing, amazing feeling. And I know that you've experienced it too, Lyndi.
Yes, most definitely. But I also want to ask you a question.
Okay.
After you have taken in these senses and been aware and paid attention, how do you recommend you finish off the forest bathe? Is there some kind of closure, or what do you suggest there?
Well, when we're leaving the forest, we get back to the spot we started from. I usually do a loop on these walks. People feel very safe when they go forward and backward or in a loop that brings them to where they started. And it's also easier when you have cars and things like that to manage. But when we get back to the beginning, we'll find the rocks that we left our worries in. And it's up to you at that point whether you would like to pick up that rock and take your worries back, or whether you entrust some or all of your worries to that stone and leave it right where you put it. And then we usually share a few things that have meant a lot to us on our walk. And in so doing, again, you'll be amazed at what some people have gotten from the walk. Some people have made a metaphor for life by what they've seen in the forest. And others have just really taken it all in and they don't really know what to make of it. And that's why many times, if we have the space and the time, I will ask people to process in a way of either writing down some of the things that they have seen, of telling us what they have felt, seen, heard with all their senses, how this experience has affected them. And I did have one lady who said, well, it was a really nice walk. I don't know what you people see in this place. And that's fair too. I just hope that she goes back one day and takes a closer look. I've had a gentleman say to me that he's been hiking in the forest for years and has never noticed what he noticed on a forest bathing hike. And I thought that was very nice as well. So the processing at the end, a lot of it is just, do you want to just pick up where you left off, or are you now going about your day in a better way, feeling better, feeling more relaxed? And can you take this feeling out into your everyday life? If you're having a monkey brain moment going to bed, can you go back to where you were today and envision these places that you were at, or the things that you saw, and help them to calm your brain and then relax and perhaps go to sleep? And it's different for everyone. Right? Everyone gets something different out of the experience. I
love looking at the symbiosis in the forest. We often see like orchids or bromeliads or other plants that are growing on the trees. And, some just have a few and others are just loaded with them. And that's a great reminder of our connectedness to nature and to one another.
Mm-hmm. Lyndi, thanks for joining us today all the way from Panama. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope it's not too hot there. If you'd like more information about this topic, you can always reach out to me, Bren at freshwaves.ca, and the forest therapy that happens at Fresh Waves is called Twigs and Tea, Nature Connection and Forest Therapy. Well, we've covered an awful lot this morning on Fresh Waves, and I think we should give a little summary. I've been talking with Lyndi Allison. She is an author and an avid hiker. She used to live in Ontario, and she now lives in Panama in Central America. And we've been talking about walking in nature, hiking in nature, being a part of nature, doing nature therapy. And we've been talking about a little organization called Twigs and Tea. and it is guided forest therapy. If you'd like more information about that, you can get a hold of me, Bren, at freshwaves.ca. Ask me some questions and I can tell you all about Twigs and Tea, nature connection, and forest therapy. I thought that we would lend some credibility to what we were talking about this morning by telling you some information, sort of paraphrasing it, because if I read it, it is really complex. But it's from the NIH, which is the National Institutions of Health in the U.S. And their research has shown, it has been reported, that forest bathing and forest therapy has the following beneficial effects on human health. Forest bathing increases human natural killer cells and activity of those cells and the intracellular levels of anti-cancer proteins, suggesting a preventative effect on cancers. That is astounding. It reduces blood pressure and heart rate with a preventative effect on hypertension and heart disease. It reduces stress hormones. It increases the activity of the parasympathetic nerves and reduces the activity of sympathetic nerves to stabilize the balance of autonomic nervous system. It can improve sleep. It reduces the scores of anxiety, depression, anger, fatigue, and confusion on the POMS test, which is the profile of mood states, and increases the score of vigor, showing preventative effects on depression. Again, fascinating. It may apply to rehabilitation medicine, which is what we were talking about of taking people into the forest when they're recovering from various illnesses. And they know that even city parks have a positive benefit on human health. Another key thing that the NIH presents is that forest bathing may have preventative effects on diseases such as COVID-19 by boosting immune function and reducing mental stress. All of those are really great findings. There are a plethora of studies available around the world from Japan, Germany, the UK, the US, and some in Canada, talking about the benefits of forest bathing, forest therapy, and just being out in nature. If you'd like to hear this podcast broadcast again, go to our YouTube channel, Fresh Waves Radio. While you're there, hit subscribe. We love to have subscribers. And then you can listen to all of the other previous broadcasts and podcasts. We've done several interviews already with Lyndi about writing. And we are going to have more podcasts on nature and the benefits of being in nature and creating symbioses in nature. So stay tuned for all of those. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you again next time.